Hey guys, so this is Mr. Flores and welcome to your fantastic fun Friday video where I'm going to teach you the best chocolate chip cookie recipe you'll ever have. This is going to be anything your mom or your grandma makes you, I promise you. Now, this chocolate chip recipe comes to us from one of my favorite cookbooks called Milk Bar Life by a pastry chef named Christina Tosi, and I've made this chocolate chip cookie recipe multiple times for a lot of different people in my life, including some of the teachers at TPAA. Ask Miss Collins about it and Mr. Ione. They will tell you that it's fantastic.
His cookies are amazing. Are you kidding me? You're not gonna have any problems remembering that day.
So I'm gonna run down through some of the ingredients that you're gonna need to make this cookie recipe yours if you choose to make it. Now, it's a simple list. I'm assuming you're gonna have everything at your house with the exception of probably one ingredient, which is kind of optional, but I'd recommend you go out and get it if you wanna make it true to the recipe because it will make a big difference in the end of your product. So, what are you gonna need? First of all, you're gonna need yourself some butter, light brown sugar, which I have in this container right here, a half a cup of regular sugar, which I have in this little kind of container right there, some vanilla extract, some all-purpose flour, and this is the special ingredient that you might want to make a trip to the grocery store for. It is called nonfat dry milk powder. So this is the stuff that you mix with water to get some sort of milk mixture. I've never actually had it the way that it's intended, but this is something that this particular chef here likes to incorporate in a lot of her cookies because it kind of gives you that like really kind of, memory of childhood cookies at home. This is kind of like a really interesting ingredient. I would recommend you go out and get it, but it's not going to be a deal breaker if you don't have it. You're also going to want to have some salt, which I have in this container right here. You're going to need some baking powder and some baking soda. And finally, and definitely the star of the show, a bag of chocolate chip cookies, about 12 ounces. I will include the recipe in the description so that you guys can recreate this at home. So let's go ahead and get started on that. All right, so the first thing you're gonna need to do is you're going to need to make sure that your oven is turned to 375 degrees. That's the first mistake that people make when they make cookies is that they forget to turn the oven on before they start making the cookies. So let's go over and turn that oven to 375 degrees. Okay, now that I have my oven to 375 degrees, we can actually begin making the recipe. So the recipe states that the first thing you gotta do is you got to actually melt your butter. So the way that I'm gonna melt my butter is I'm gonna take a measuring glass and I'm going to actually just put it into the microwave with the wrappers off and kind of melt it. Now, I do not wanna melt it to the point where it's burning hot. I just wanna melt it to the point where it's just slightly melted. And I wanna make sure that my butter is warm, not hot. If you have really, really hot melted butter, the cookies are going to melt in the oven. So you wanna make sure that when you melt your butter, that you melt it and then maybe let it sit for maybe 5 to 10 minutes to cool off before you actually proceed with the recipe. All right, so I have my butter in this measuring glass and we're gonna walk on over to the microwave right here. We're gonna put that in there, we're gonna close it. And we're gonna set it to, you know what, you wanna do it in 30-second increments so that your butter does not explode all over your microwave. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're cleaning up that microwave, and I'm sure your parents do not want to have to do that. So as you can see, it's kind of melted. Kind of shake it a little bit. Oop. And then let's add in another, well, let's let this timer finish. 7 seconds left. All right, so I took my butter out of the microwave and it's all melted. Now I'm gonna stick my finger into the butter just to make sure that it's not super hot. And it does feel a little warm to me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to let this sit for maybe 5 to 10 minutes on the counter, maybe swirl it around a little bit to release some of the steam before I proceed with the recipe so that I'm not gonna end up having melted cookies in the oven. So we'll come back for that. All right, so as our butter kind of cools down a little bit, we're gonna proceed with the recipe. So I'm gonna take a mixing bowl and I'm going to add half a cup of regular white sugar. So let's go ahead and do that. So here's my white sugar. Let's do half a cup. Gotta be precise. white sugar. The next part of the recipe says to add in light brown sugar. If you have dark brown sugar, it'll work just as fine. I have my dark brown sugar here. Now the recipe says 3/4 of a cup of lightly packed dark brown sugar, or light brown sugar I should say. Now, how do you do that in a recipe? You're gonna take your measuring cup, and my measuring cups actually have a 3/4 of a cup line, which don't think many of you could probably, you could probably see it right there. There's some lines. Anyway, within the measuring cup, I'm gonna take my measuring cup and I'm gonna go ahead and pour a little bit of the brown sugar in there. Now, as I sprinkle the brown sugar in there, I'm gonna just kind of lightly kind of press down on the sugar so that it measures correctly. Now, light brown sugar is one of those things where you can continue putting some sugar in and it will keep fitting, which would lead to kind of some inaccurate measurement. So the way that you get too closely 3/4 of a cup is to just kind of sprinkle and just kind of lightly pack the measuring cup. So that's what I'm doing right here. This is fun. All right, we're getting to 3/4 of a cup, maybe just a little more. That's about 3/4 of a cup, so there's just like a quarter left. I hope it's kind of blurry. So you take your mixing bowl and bam, right there. You're also going to need yourself wooden spoon or a mixing spoon and a very strong arm because you're going to be doing all this by hand. So take your mixture and just kind of, mix it all together, right? Now, the recipe says to finally take your 2 sticks of melted butter. Perfect. I think it is warm but not hot that it's just gonna turn into soup, right? Take your mixture and let's pour it into our mixing bowl. Ooh, butter. Nice. I love butter. Remember, use real butter. So take your mixing bowl and the next part of the recipe says to just mix it all together for 1 minute until it becomes homogeneous, meaning it becomes like one instead of it looking like half sugar, half butter. So this is what it looks like right now. I don't want to pour it, but kind of looks weird. So let's go ahead and make it homogeneous. It doesn't look, I can't tell what you guys are looking at, but it doesn't look very homogeneous. It just kind of looks like slightly not together. So I'll show you what homogeneous looks like in a sec. So notice how it's coming together. It doesn't look too separated now, but we still got a little bit more to go, so I'm gonna keep on mixing. All right, I wanna show you just what the mixture looks like so far before we proceed. So as you can see, it's kind of become one, right? You can tell it's just one mixture. So now the recipe says that we have to add in our egg and vanilla. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna add 1 egg. So good practice that you should have is to crack your eggs away from the mixture so that if you accidentally get some shell in there, it doesn't end up in your finished product. So cracking our eggs. Nice. You can take our mixture and then dump our egg in there. 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. 1, 2. Here's our mixture so far. Kind of looks gross, but we mix away for 1 more minute until it's all incorporated again. Smells really good. I could probably just eat this right now, but I won't. Don't eat raw cookie dough, or at least eat it, but don't tell anybody you did. Here you can get sick. It's never happened to me though. So here's what our mixture looks like so right now. After I mixed in the egg and the vanilla. All right, so now we got to move on with what is called the dry part of the recipe. What we did is we mixed together all the stuff that's wet, like the eggs, the vanilla, the butter, all that is mixed. So now we got to add in all the stuff that is called dry ingredients. That includes your flour, your salt, your baking powder, your baking soda, things like that. So the first part of the recipe, we want to mix in 1 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour. I got this massive amount of flour here because I'm always baking at home. It's one of my hobbies. Now I'm gonna go ahead and switch on over to this rubber spatula because it's gonna make it easy for me to kind of scrape the sides of the bowl as the cookie dough comes together. So we want 1 1/4 cups. So I'm gonna go ahead and I guess I can show you, right? So now I have you down here, you can probably see all of the ingredients a lot better, right? So we want 1 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour. So a good way to do that is to take your measuring cup and you kind of slightly scoop in there, but not too forcefully to like stuff a bunch of flour in there. And once you scoop, you can take a knife or a rubber spatula and kind of glide it across your measuring cup like this, to the point where you get a perfect, clean amount of flour like that. So that's 1 3/4 cup. So kind of like 3/4 of the brown sugar earlier. We're gonna put that together. And I would say that's about 3/4 cup. Put that in there. Then we also have to add in our milk powder. So this is the ingredient that I told you you should try to go out and get. But if you don't have it, don't want to go get it, it's not going to be a big deal. For that part, we need 2 tablespoons. So 1 tablespoon right there, and a 2nd tablespoon. We need some salt. So for the salt part, the recipe calls for 1 1/4 teaspoons of it. So I need to go clean out my... So in this part of the recipe, I'm using what is called kosher salt, which is a very common type of salt that you use when you cook and you bake. If you do not have kosher salt, I will list in the ingredients how much of just regular table salt you can use. So 1 teaspoon and 1/4, which I need that 1/4 measuring spoon, and 1/4 right in there. Finally, we're gonna need some baking soda and baking powder. So let's start off with the baking powder. The recipe says we need to use 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. So I'm gonna go ahead and use 1/2 teaspoon. About that much. Baking soda, it wants 1/4 teaspoon. So baking soda and in there. So I'm gonna take my wooden spoon right here and I'm just gonna lightly, not even like mix it together with the brown sugar just yet, just kind of on the surface, kind of get all the dry ingredients kind of incorporated a little bit before I blend it in to the rest of the dough. So once I feel like it's good, I'm gonna just start mixing for about 30 seconds. You don't wanna over mix your cookie dough because then all your cookie dough is gonna turn out to be really stiff and your cookies are gonna be like rocks. You want soft, chewy cookies. So just mix until you see all of the white of the dough or the flour and the dry mixture just kind of disappear and blend in nicely with the dough. It's smelling amazing right now. I just, gotta have a cookie. So this is so far what it looks like. I'm gonna blend a little bit longer than that because as you can see, I can still see some white in there. I'm gonna keep mixing. That looks pretty good. The next and final part, chocolate chips. So we're gonna go ahead and add this entire bag, 12 ounces, into our recipe here. All right, now you blend that all together and look at what you have. You have this amazing cookie dough. You just kind of mix it for a little bit just to incorporate some of the chocolate chips in it all. But not too much that you make your dough like too mixed together, right? Okay. So let's take a look at what our dough looks like. Right there. That is your chocolate chip cookie dough. So now that we have our cookie dough, which ended up looking like that, you're going to form them into cookie dough balls that you are going to put onto a baking sheet. Now I ended up putting parchment paper on this baking sheet so that my cookies don't stick. If you have a non-stick baking pad, that would probably work as well, but I always like a piece of parchment paper on there to make sure that those cookies end up coming off of the pan. Another really helpful tool that you might have, I'm not sure if you do, would be a cookie scoop. Now this cookie scoop right here is gonna allow me to, is it focusing on me? Is gonna allow me to scoop cookies and drop them onto the sheet pan in the same size every single time. But if you don't have one, you can easily roll them out as well. And I'll show you about the size that they need to be. So if I were using this, I would just take my cookie dough and have that much. Take some in my hand and drop it on right there, right? That's what it's looking like for me. So I'm gonna keep doing this and forming those cookie dough balls. So in my ice cream scoop method, I ended up with about 13 cookie dough balls. So if you're looking at your dough and you don't have one of those, how do you end up with the same? Just kind of divide your dough in half with your hands, then divide it into quarters, and then you should end up with, in each one of those quarters that you divide in your dough, you should be able to make about 3 cookie dough balls that you roll with your hand to get kind of the same thing. So if you end up with around 12, that would be probably best. Now, I'm not gonna cook all these off right away, but your next step would be to take another cookie sheet or to take some of these off the cookie dough sheet, take them off of the pan and make sure that you're only cooking about 4 at a time. Otherwise, they're going to spread like crazy and run into each other and you're gonna end up with like a cookie layer or something. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some of these off and only bake off about 4 for the moment. All right, so as you can see, I got 4 cookie dough balls right here, and I'm going to just kind of arrange them in a way that they won't run into each other. So they need to have about 2 or 3 inches of space in between them, and we're gonna put these into the oven. The oven should be set to 375 degrees, and you need to bake them for about 10 to 12 minutes. It's always better to underbake a cookie because then it stays kind of chewy on the inside. So I would probably estimate about 10 minutes. So we're gonna go put them in the oven right now. So as I'm waiting for these cookies to get done, you might ask yourself, well, what am I gonna do with all these cookies right here? Well, one of the things that I like to do is I like to make a bunch of cookies and then I end up putting them in a Ziploc bag. And I put them in a Ziploc bag and I put them in the freezer. So whenever I want a chocolate chip cookie, I usually grab one from the freezer, let it sit out at room temperature for about 15 or so minutes as the oven comes to 375 degrees and sets itself. And then I throw them in the oven kind of halfway frozen and the cookie turns out just fine. So you can have cookies whenever you want them without having to put in all the effort of having to make another recipe. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these in the freezer for the next time I get an aching for a sweet cookie. Look at that. My cookies. Now we gotta let them sit and cool completely on the pan. So as you can tell, my camera ended up dying on me and I'm glad that it happened towards the end of the video, but I still got everything I wanted to get in there. Let me show you what my cookies ended up looking like. Let's see if I can do this. Here they are for reference. And then what if I hold one up? There you go. That is the best chocolate chip cookie you're ever gonna have. Let's take a bite. That was good. Oh yeah. You need to make these. They're really good.